Pecha Kucha 128, The Spirit and Goldfish. This is the third week on this security course, so I'm just reading comics on the bus and just wasting all day every day on this silly security training course. I'm not sure what's more embarrassing this week, the comics I've read or the course itself. So this week was about learning how to be a CCTV operator. We actually even got to play around with a genuine working CCTV camera. And it's, well, if it was complicated, CCTV operators wouldn't get paid so little. There's a lot of legislation that governs what you can watch, who can watch it and for what reasons, and none of that was in the test because the test is designed so that any imbecile can pass it, because apparently that's how the security industry works. Good news is I'll be getting a job, no doubt. One thing I did learn that was actually worth learning in general is the phonetic alphabet. It's just a useful thing to have when you're having conversations and you need to keep spelling your name and you've got N's and E's and C's and G's in there. So it's not a complete waste of time, just about 99%. Not to be cynical or anything. Speaking of cynical, right, Goldfish, the first graphic novel. Brian Michael Bendis, I believe, being both the artist and the writer. Here's the thing, it's a black and white comic, it's got a noir feel to it. I should like it, but it comes off as a poor man's Sin City. And Sin City's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. It does also, every issue or every other issue starts with this kind of, a Boom Boom Studios production thing where it's almost like it knows it's only trying to be a script for a movie that's never going to get made. Oh man, I shouldn't be going too hard on this fast, but yeah, even the composition of the art, and it's a very difficult thing to show, and I just picked a page at random. I feel like sometimes the forms don't sit well with each other. It's just a little bit clumsy to read. It's a very difficult thing for me to explain because I'm not even sure what I'm talking about, but the art isn't my favourite art I've ever seen. And the characters are a bunch of damaged, jaded non-hero types, which is typical for a noir story, but they have no redeeming features. No one in the entire story is a sympathetic character, and even when they are, they just come off as pathetic. And the plot, well, it's not a plot twist ending, but the ending is extremely violent, and a lot of bad things happen in a small amount of time, but it's very difficult to get emotionally invested because it can't be a tragedy when it happens to bad people. Speaking of tragedies, moving on to The Spirit. So Will Eisner wrote this, or drew this, and it was serialized in a newspaper in America at some time in the 1940s, so this is super old, and you will see that causes certain problems when you read this in 2019. Oh boy, right, so every issue is a 7-page comic. One of the highlights is that the first page is usually a very interesting, dynamic representation of the name The Spirit. Will Eisner's done this kind of thing all throughout his career. It's one of his signature moves, and it's really interesting. Yeah, because the Spirit is a superhero from the 40s, he typically gets beat down by the bad guys and then kind of gets saved more by luck than his own ingenuity. And I think this was also a comic trope happening to Batman up into the 70s. This is just how comic books were written. If you've seen the 60s Spider-Man, you'll know what I'm talking about. The Spirit also has an incredible amount of casual misogyny. Like, this is just a random page of this one woman being like slapped around quite a lot and being okay with it. The presumption being the reader is okay with it as well. Considering it was the 1940s, the reader probably was okay with it. To add to your casual misogyny, you have the very rare but very extreme example of casual racism. The left page, in the middle, right-hand panel, there's just I guess it's a black guy driving a taxi, and it's just so racist, but it's of no consequence to the plot whatsoever. But I would also say that the comic book I got out of the library shouldn't be whitewashed, because this is actually a great example of like comic book anthropology. It's good that we know the history of all these things, because this just talks to what America was like in the 40s, and it's not really about Will Eisner at all. So it's worth being aware of these things. But I did actually manage to read a comic book that wasn't fucked for some reason. No, it was fucked, but it was fucked in a good way. Hellblazer. I've yet to read a bad Constantine comic book. I've read some that are strong, I've read some that are weaker, but still, John Constantine remains mostly unhumbled, much like the character. In this collection of comics from the early 90s was one with Constantine as a kid, and he's a weird kid. Yeah, him being involved in the occult makes a lot of sense, considering his childhood. Very interesting. I don't know if it sticks canonically. He is a DC character, and that means nothing really sticks ever. There is this fat butcher dude in one of the stories who is one of the most evil people I've seen represented in a comic book in maybe years. He's just a nasty, cruel bastard. He's terrible to his family. He's a butcher. He's abusive to the animals. He's just so unsympathetic. And then there's a story about Constantine and the Golden Boy, who is effectively his twin brother he killed in the womb. And this story goes weird places, but that's what I expect from Constantine, and I hope for it. It's all very interesting, introspective stuff that probably doesn't apply canonically after the fact. And Sad Clown of the Week is me, because I spent my Saturday stewarding at a rugby match at Twickenham Station, and I could do a Pecha Kucha on that by itself. It wasn't the job itself that made the experience so harrowing. It was like everything else. Probably the hardest part of the day was trying to get home with about 30,000 drunk people on the public transport. But all in all, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it would be. So, yeah. That brings us to the end of Pecha Kucha 128, and I will see you next time.